Okay, so why questions are good, I think. It's good to be curious, it's good to ask why questions. So a bit of recap on models. Why models? Why we kind of labour under this, what's the right word? We feel obliged that we should be using a model. I think that's been drilled into us. You should be using a model. But let's be rebellious. Why? Why should we be using a model? What's the benefit of them? Oh, come on. Why should we use models?
Gives us standardized assessments.
Yeah, yeah.
Applies your practice and gives you structure to how you share your information with your MDT.
Yeah, it gives you structure. Yeah, yeah, and a means of communicating that structure to the MDT. Yeah. So I'm going to turn this off. Yep. Anything else?
It gives us the theory that underpins our practice. So it
yes.
tells us what we're doing, why we're doing it.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it gives you something to underpin what you're doing. Exactly. I think if I was to summarise it in one phrase, it would be it's about evidence-based clinical reasoning. So every day you are making lots of decisions and judgments about what sort of questions to ask people, what type of advice to give people, lots of decisions that you're making unconsciously a lot of the time, and using a model, what sort of advice to give people, what sort of goals to set with people, and using a model gives that a bit more of a theoretical underpinning. It gives you more of a robust approach to guiding those daily decisions that you're making, rather than it just being because you've always done it that way, or because your last supervisor does it that way. So yeah, it's just a bit more of a robust way of guiding those that decision-making process. And related to that, a model helps you. A good model should give you the tools to actually connect the theory with practice. So it should give you, yes, assessment tools. It should give you some tools to actually apply these theoretical concepts to the real world and to real people. So that's why models. So why Moho? It's essentially, it used to be very much a two-horse race between Moho and what was the other front runner, probably a few years ago? Pardon? CMOP, yeah, Canadian model, yeah, which gives us the COPM, and that kind of evolved from Reed and Sanderson, and so it was very much a two-horse race, Moho and Canadian model. There's a couple of others now that are kind of beginning to catch up and be part of the picture as well. So the other two, what are the other two? Pardon? Possibly. Actually, this is where disclaimer. I've not been a student for a long time, so I thought that might be part of the personal environment. I thought that might be put under the umbrella of Canadian model, but is it totally separate?
It's separate.
Yeah. Okay. That's disclaimer. The other two I was thinking of was the Kawa, the sort of river one, and then the model of creative abilities. They're the other two that often get spoken about. My understanding, and again, students, please update me on this if I'm not telling the truth. My understanding is that they are still very much evolving in terms of their research. They're not as well researched as the other two, and they don't have quite the same battery of tools. They do have tools that go with them, but there's not the same range of tools, and they've not been as well developed and refined as Canadian model and Moho. So why have we opted as a trust to focus our efforts on Moho rather than the Canadian model? Well, three main reasons. Of the two, it does have the larger evidence base. There's been more research done on Moho than has the Canadian model. It also has a very extensive range of assessment tools. The Canadian model, as far as I know, I think it still only has the COPM, the Canadian Occupational Performance Measure, whereas, as you know, Moho has 15, around about 15 standardized assessment tools. And then the third reason why we've kind of opted for MOHO over the Canadian model is the attention it plays to volition. Now, particularly in mental health, I mean, I think you would argue in any field, but particularly in mental health, volition is such a helpful concept. And we'll come to see more about why that is later. But it's a really helpful framework for thinking about the whole area, about engaging tricky to engage people and understanding what drives people and what impact mental health has on that drive. So, but again, it's important, I think, to recognize that a model is designed to guide our practice, not to dictate our practice. It's a tool, it's a servant, not a master. So if you feel like you're slipping into a mindset of, oh, I suppose I should use a MOHO tool because I'm getting leaned on by my supervisor, or I'm getting leaned on by, practice development lead OT to be using a tool. Resist that. Come back to the why questions. Why? What is the benefit of using this tool? And if you conclude and you can argue in discussion with your supervisor that it's really not adding anything, it's meant to help you. It's meant to serve you. It's meant to help you do your job better. So always make that your test. Is this tool helping me understand my patients better and guiding me in terms of what I need to do to make their lives better? So because we do these annual audits now that kind of feed back to you how many assessments you're doing, that's a pro and it's a con. The good thing about that is it is a little bit of someone's checking up on me. So it's a little bit of a nudge and an encouragement to use a tool because we think they are helpful. But the con to having a system that compares you to other people is you can start thinking, oh, I've got to use these tools, I've got to tick these boxes, I've got to do it, without really being fully persuaded that it's helping you do your job. So I hope today will be part of helping you make an informed decision about whether MOHO is going to help you do your job better or not. But be critical. Don't just swallow it because you've been taught. Okay. Right, so this might be my first attempt to display desktop, and so we'll see how that goes. Right. Okay. Right, hopefully that's still recording. Okay. So you've got the handout in front of you anyway, but I'll try and keep a pace with this. I'm not sure how that'll go, but we'll try and keep the screen going as well. So, single sentence definition of MOHO. It's a way of understanding. So that's the first thing. It's helping us understand people better. A way of understanding how human occupation is motivated. So that's the volition or the will bit. How it's organized. That's the habituation or drill. And how it's performed. The skill. And finally, how it's influenced by the environment. So donkeys years ago, I was taught the easy way to remember it was will, drill, skill for the three kind of the internal parts of the person and then the environment. Can't think of something that rhymes with that for the environment. Someone might be able to do that. Okay. So MOHO argues that there are these four main factors that influence what we do and how well we do it. First of all, volition. So that's in everyday language, our motivation and our confidence. Secondly, it's habituation. It's just one of the few bits of jargon that's managed to survive down the years. They've kind of whittled out a lot of the jargon. But habituation is basically how we organize and how we structure our lives. Third aspect that influences what we do and how well we do it is our skills, our physical, our cognitive, and our people skills. And the other bit that influences what we do and how well we do it is, of course, the environment. So I've come up with this sort of MOHO equation. I did a lot of maths at school, so equations are kind of drilled into me. I did 2 maths A-levels for reasons that puzzle me now. So for our friend here, the smiley face, for that person to be able to do all the things that they need and want to be able to do, these are the things that these are the components that they're going to need. They're going to need adequate motivation and confidence in their ability to do the things that they need to do. They're going to need some structure, some organisation, some routines, and some roles which guide and shape how they carry out their everyday tasks. They're going to need the skills. They're going to need some physical, cognitive, and people skills to be able to do those things. And ideally, they're going to need a supportive environment, a physical and social environment. So MOHO kind of is kind of a glorified activity analysis. It's just guiding you through the components. What are the bits that we need to be able to function in a healthy way, to be able to successfully achieve and do the things that we need to be able to do? Just pause at that point. Is that clear? Yeah? Okay, good. Okay, so we're going to now look at a little bit more detail. So we're looking at volition. We're going to start with volition, obviously. So volition, as human beings, we have this sort of innate curiosity and this need to be occupied. If you look at a baby, if you've either had your own children or if you've been around young children, you will know that you don't have to teach them to be curious. You don't have to teach them to get into mischief. You don't have to teach them to get into things, to feel things, to put things in their mouths. And as soon as they can move, you don't have to teach them to move, to go and explore this amazing world all around them. They have this innate drive, this innate curiosity, this innate desire to engage with the world around them. So volition helps us understand how that drive gets channeled into the choices and decisions that we make. Obviously, a child makes quite primitive, quite basic decisions. As we grow up, those decisions and the range of choices available to us become not quite infinite, but there's a range of different choices. And the concept of volition helps us understand the fascinating range of choices that human beings make. And it's an amazing concept. It's a really helpful concept to help us understand why people do what they do. Okay. And there are three subdivisions of volition that help us unpick that and understand it a bit better. So personal causation is, again, one of the other bits of jargon that's managed to survive down the years. But it's basically our sense of competence and our sense of effectiveness. So it's kind of confidence and self-awareness. It's those kind of things lumped together. And actually it is jargon, but when you think about it, it's sort of, can I personally cause things to happen in the way that I want them to? Can I cause things personally to happen in a way that I want them to? Can I achieve the desired outcomes of my activity? So, if volition is about what drives us to make the choices that we make, how do you think personal causation shapes and influences our decisions? That's a question for you. So how do you think personal causation influences our decision making about what we choose to do?
Take the lowest common denominator if we haven't got much confidence, rather than sort of aim a bit higher.
Yes. Why do we do that?
Fear of failure?
Yes. Massive issue. Massive issue. It's a lot to do with personal causation. Is a lot to do with comfort zones. We tend to choose to do things that we think are within our comfort zone. Now, some of us have really big comfort zones. Some of us are risk takers. Some of us like to do really adventurous things, or not much phases us. We're willing to try anything. And some of us actively like to throw ourselves beyond our comfort zone. Think bungee jump, think parachute. Some of us really want to throw ourselves beyond our comfort zone. Some of us have much smaller comfort zones. We've got a much narrower range of things that we're comfortable doing. Hi, don't worry.
Will you help us with the cafe hour?
The cafe?
Yeah, will you help us with the cafe hour? I think you said to me, we're strictly
I've sent a lot of emails since then, but okay, apologies if that's the case. Grab a handout. Okay. Right. Right. So we've got as far as volition. So you're on halfway down the first page. We're just unpicking the concept of volition and just trying to understand the components, the influences of why people choose to do what they do. That's what volition's about. Why do people do what they do, and helping us understand that better. So we've just said, how does personal causation, how does our sense of confidence and self-awareness affect the choices that we make? And we've been talking about comfort zones. Our personal causation would determine how big our comfort zone is. We tend to choose to do things that we think we're going to be able to do, and we tend to avoid things that we think we're not going to be able to do. Because, as Amanda says, we don't like failure. We try and avoid the experience of failure. So we tend to want to do things that we think we're going to be able to achieve. Okay. Right. So let's move on. And if you think about this clinically now, if you think about some of your service users, many of them will be in a stage of their lives where they're experiencing a powerful sense of inadequacy. Having an illness or a disability challenges your view of yourself as a capable person. You begin to doubt whether you can achieve the things that you want to be able to achieve. And because that's a painful realization, the comfort zone gets reined in, and people will avoid doing things that they think they won't be able to achieve. So personal causation will have a big determinant about what the things that people choose to do versus the things that they choose to avoid. Okay, so secondly, values. So values are our convictions about what's important and meaningful in life, and it influences your goals. So again, how do you think your values affect your choices? How do your values shape and influence what you choose to do and what you choose to avoid to do?
Well, all your choices are sort of should be kind of based on your values. You won't want to do something that doesn't hold with your beliefs.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. No, that's exactly it. Values are about what's important to us. So if you feel strongly about something, it kind of obliges you. You kind of feel compelled to do something about that. So quite often interesting talking to people in the caring professions about their values. What brought you into this work in the first place? Why did you feel strongly? Why did you make a decision probably that was not going to be financially motivated? Maybe it was, but I would have thought that wouldn't have been top of your value system to earn lots of money. You would have a different set of values that led you to be where you are today. And if you have clear values, a clear sense about what's important and what life is about, you're going to be more focused. You're going to be more driven. You're going to be more motivated because you know what you're about and what you're trying to achieve. And again, an illness or a disability can result in people having difficulty enacting their values. So if you think about, what are some of the common or predominant values living in 21st century London? What are the values that we pick up from the culture around us? That's the other point. Values are massively influenced by the culture that we live in. We kind of, as an osmosis, we assimilate often the values of the culture around us. Some people actively rebel against that and don't want to be part of the system, but most of us kind of feel like we want to be relatively consistent with the values of the culture around us. So what are some of those values that we pick up from 21st London at the moment? What's important? What's the world around us telling us is important?
Climate change.
Climate change, yeah.
Protecting the planet.
Yeah. Pardon? Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Healthy lifestyle.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, there's kind of a big kick about health at the moment, isn't there? Yeah.
Heart
high achievement in
yes,
big cities.
yes, you are what you achieve.
Yeah,
yeah. If you haven't made,
well,
yes,
kind of,
yeah.
having enough money to buy a house.
Yes, materialism. Materialism is
yeah.
a big thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
You can say something.
It's like having access to things quite quickly.
Yes,
yes.
Yes, that's a good point. Yeah. Celebrity is a big thing, isn't it? You know, we kind of esteem celebrity. We kind of value celebrities. So people and I guess work, huge value of our society, isn't it? You should be working. If you're not working, why are you not working? What's wrong with you? So if you think about our clients again, if they're struggling to enact the things that they feel strongly about, and also that society feels strongly about, that again can be very demotivated, because they're frustrated. They know that they know they should be doing these things, but there's a dissonance. They're not able to live a life that is consistent with their values. So a big part of our role then is either helping people to reappraise their values in the light of a disability, or to overcome the impact of the disability, so that they are then able to do the things that are important to them. Okay, so the third part of volition is probably the easiest bit, so that's interests. Quite simply, what we see as being enjoyable and satisfying. Fairly obvious how our interests affect our choices, isn't it? You don't have to be persuaded to do something you enjoy. You just have a natural attraction to do things that you enjoy. So just to summarize volition, personal causation, values and interests comprise what I tend to call our unique volitional fingerprint. And I do think it's pretty unique. I think each of us have a very individual volitional profile of those three characteristics: personal causation, values and interests, which determine our decision making about what we choose to do, or at least strongly influence our decision making about what we choose to do. And of course, it explains why there are these fascinating variations in what people choose to do. So I often ask people in these sessions, how many of you like walking as a leisure occupation? How many of you enjoy walking? Put your hand up if you enjoy walking. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, it's normally a bit more than that. It's normally a bit more than half. So we're kind of around about the 50% mark. And I simply don't understand you guys, right? Now, for me, I don't. That's not something I would choose to do. But the more I've got to speak to walkers, I am beginning to understand you more. I'm beginning to understand, even though that's not part of my volitional profile, that wouldn't be part of what I choose to do. I'm beginning to understand why walkers walk and why they enjoy it. But it's not as simple as that, because you start talking to walkers and you find out they walk for different reasons. Some people walk because it's fresh air, the environment, being outside. Some people walk because it's quality time with a loved one. Some people walk because it's physical exercise, and a whole host of other reasons. So it's really interesting when you get to probe, and I think I'm still really interested in people and why they do what they do. And if I meet someone new, yes, I want to know what their job is, but to be honest, I'm more interested in what they choose to do when they've got absolutely free rein. What do you do with your free time? I think that's really interesting. It tells you a lot about a person, and I think we should always be fascinated, be curious about your patients and why they do what they do. And if you trace it back, it will be almost certainly related to those three things: personal causation, values, and interests. We tend to choose to do things either personal causation because we're good at them, or at least they're within our comfort zone, and we're pretty confident we're going to be able to achieve them. Secondly, we choose to do things because they're important to us, and we feel compelled, we feel obliged to do those things. Thirdly, we choose to do things because we enjoy them and they're pleasurable. And they're often interwoven. We want to be competent at doing the things that we value, and we tend to enjoy things that we do well. So there's a kind of, the three are interconnected. And of course, this has major implications when you're thinking about your work with service users. Because whenever you make any sort of suggestion to them about an activity or about a course of action, so the example I often have in mind here is sort of impatience. You know, you've got an art group running and you're trying to rally people up, you're trying to encourage people to come to the art group. What sort of questions are going to be going through people's minds when they make that decision about whether to come to the art group or not? Number one, they might be asking, probably unconsciously all of this, but they'll be asking themselves, am I any good at art? Am I going to be able to achieve at this? Am I going to look silly? What's the last time most people have done any art? School. They would have left school with a script about themselves, about whether they're any good at art or not. So that's something that will be of influence in that decision. Number two, they'll be asking themselves, what's the point? What's the point of art? I just want to get out of here. I want to get on with my life. I don't want to be stuck in this place. How's art going to help me get out of here? What's the importance of art to this person? Number three, easy one. Am I going to enjoy it? Do I like art? Is it going to be any fun? Is it going to relieve some of the boredom in this place? Okay. So, and if you can't tick at least one of those boxes when you're making a suggestion for an activity, almost certainly not going to come. They're not going to engage with you. You're not going to be on the same page as them. And same with the community. Anything you're doing, any intervention that you suggest with a person, if you're not ticking, if you're not providing something, or you're not on the same page as their volitional profile, then you're going to have engagement problems. Okay. So hopefully you're beginning to see now why volition is such a helpful concept. The better we understand an individual, really worth taking time to understand someone's volition, particularly. The whole lot's important, but if you really, once you understand someone's volition, a lot of the other areas begin to make sense much more quickly. Okay, I'm going to go through those a bit more quickly. Any questions on volition? No? Okay, let's move on. So, habituation. So, habituation is the way that we organise our behaviour into routines and patterns, and it provides structure and consistency which maintains our function, helps us to do things consistently and regularly. So, there's two subdivisions here. So, we've got habits. So, this is mostly about how we structure and how we manage our time. Oh yeah, come in.
Sorry.
No, don't worry. We need a punch bag in this room for people when they come in who've had horrible journeys or they've been misinformed. So just scream out the window. Okay. So yeah, habits about how we structure and how we manage our time. So good things and bad things about habits. Let's just give an example first of all. So think about your morning routine. I keep saying I'm going to do this, but I've never got around to doing it. Think about how many separate tasks you carry out between getting out of bed and leaving the house. I reckon it's going to be at least 15, maybe 20, maybe more different little tasks that you're doing that get you from the horizontal place in the bed to out the front door. Do you have to write a to-do list? You don't, because it's habitualized. It's habituated. These things have been ingrained. They've been repeatedly done time and time and time again, so they become habituated. You become automated in those things. So that's very helpful. That's a positive aspect of habits. So let's unpack that a bit. There can be good things about habits. There can be bad things about habits. What are the good things? What are the benefits of habits?
You don't have to think about
Exactly.
it, so you've got a bit more capacity to do other
Exactly.
things with your brain.
Very efficient. Even I can multitask. Even I can shave and think about other things because it's automated. I don't have to think about what I'm doing. So it frees up brain capacity. Habits. Yeah, that's probably the main benefit. And actually, maybe one other thing. Any other sort of benefit of a habit?
Maybe other people know what you're doing.
Yes, that's true. Yeah. If you're always in a certain place at a certain time, I suppose that's the bit I'm thinking about. It just gives it gives your week a kind of regularity. It means that you don't have to. You know that every Wednesday you've got your gym class. You don't have to plan that. It's already done for you. It's kind of taken care of. It helps you do things regularly. It helps you not forget things. That sort of thing. What are the downsides of habits? What can be the problem with habits? Give me an example. Yes. Yeah, not all habits are good. Yeah, I mean, the morning routine is a really helpful routine because it gets you up and dressed, it gets you out of the house on time. Not all habits are good. And if you're into bad habits, what's the problem? Hard to change. Habits don't change easily. They've become habits because you've repeatedly done them time and time and time again. So if you're into a negative cycle of habits, then they don't shift easily. That's the downside to habits. Okay, roles. So roles are a different type of structure. That's more about how our social behaviour is structured. Provide social structure and identity. Because when we adopt a role, we tend to adopt a whole range of behaviours that go with the role. I mean, obviously the most tangible example of that is a job description. When you enter a job, there's a whole list of behaviours that are expected that guide you in how to carry out that role. But in other roles that we live in, there's kind of a much more of an unspoken set of rules. So if you're a parent, I guess, there's not a job description, although there probably is one in some of the modern parenting books, but there's not a kind of, not really, well, certainly when I was bringing my kids up, there wasn't really a manual that showed you how to do it. You just assimilated based on your own upbringing and how your own parents did it, how you observe other people do it. You begin to get a sense of, see, these are some of the behaviours that go with being a parent. And any other roles in your life, they're a role because they ring fence a set of behaviours that guide how you perform in certain situations. Again, strongly influenced by the culture that we live in. So habits and roles, they're kind of your lifestyle. That's your way of life, your structure, how you structure your time, and then the kind of roles, your social identity. That's pretty much the umbrella term I would describe as your lifestyle. Okay, so performance is actually the nuts and bolts, the parts of us that actually produce the action. So I'm not going to dwell too much on that because I think it's fairly straightforward. So Moho uses the terms motor, so that's obviously all the physical skills that you need to be able to do things. Process skills, which is all obviously the cognitive and the perceptual skills that we need. And then communication interaction, which is the people skills. Those sort of nuts and bolts things that actually are the things that physically produce the activity. Okay. So those three, the volition, habituation, and performance, they're all the things about the person, the internal aspects of the person. But then all of these things are very strongly influenced by the environment. So two aspects of the environment. First of all, the social environment. So that's obviously your social network, the people around you, but also the broader social environment, the culture that we live in. So that influences us. The people in our lives influence us. The culture that we live in influences. And secondly, the physical environment. So that's things like your housing, your finances, transport, the actual physical geography of where you live. All of those things influence your occupational options and your day-to-day choices. So if you imagine turning up to the first day in your job or the first day on placement, you turn up, you spend hours trying to find the place because someone's given you wrong directions. You're feeling, and then you turn up, and then you knock on the door. The person says, "Who are you? What are you doing here?" And they say, "I'm the new OT." And they say, "Oh my word! I forgot you starting today. Actually, it's great you started today because we've had loads of referrals come in. if you wouldn't mind, I'm really up to my eyes. I'll try and speak to you later, but if you wouldn't mind, just you've done this before, haven't you? Just if you wouldn't mind, take that referral and contact the person. What's that going to do to your volition, your confidence? You're going to be like, oh my word, so you've been totally unsupported. You've got no support, no guidance about what you're supposed to be doing. Compare that with another day, you turn up, you've been sent lots of information beforehand, showing you where you need to be going, giving you some information to read to prepare you for the job. You knock on the door and the person says, "Oh, welcome. Sit down, have a cup of tea. I'm going to show you your plan for the week." And they're just much more supportive. You get the idea. And so the environment will massively influence your sense of well-being and your own confidence and motivation. Right. So the environment again can be a goodie and a baddie. The environment provides both opportunities and resources, but it also provides demands and constraints. So the environment can be a supportive environment, or it can be an unsupportive environment. So let's just wrap up the theory. So just to summarize, occupation is motivated by volition, it's shaped and patterned by habituation, it's made possible and it's carried out by performance, and it's all strongly influenced by the environment. So engaging in valued occupations both maintains and develops all of those things. You need to be doing things to keep those things functioning and to keep those things developing. That's how things are maintained, by doing the things that you enjoy and are important to you. So occupational therapy is therefore aimed at, first of all, developing a clear picture about which of those areas, volition, habituation, performance and environment, what the kind of current state of play is for the person that you're assessing. Trying to build up a clear sense about, first of all, what is their functioning like? How are they managing in self-care, productivity and leisure? What are the problems that they're having there? But then MOHO helps you understand why. Which of those aspects, volition, habituation, performance and environment, are making it difficult for them to be able to do the things that are important to them? So that's where obviously the assessment is a critical part. We need to understand what is going on in those four areas so that we can start thinking about what we need to be doing to helping the person overcome those challenges. Okay, so that leads us on to assessment. People okay though with the theory? I wanted to do a bit of a recap on the theory because I think it might have been a while since some of you have covered that. Okay, so let's move on to assessment tools. So in the appendix at the back, you've got a summary of the main MOHO tools, a table in Appendix 1, and it just gives you a very brief overview of each tool, what data gathering method it uses, what it particularly assesses, what the focus of the assessment is, roughly how long it takes to carry out, and then what type of report it produces at the end of it, and then whether it can be used as an outcome measure or not. So that's just a very broad overview. We're going to major mostly today on the four global MOHO assessment tools. So the four global ones are the ones that cover all of the areas of the model: volition, habituation, performance, and environment. So we're going to look at the MOHOST, the OCARES, the OP, and the OSA. And we're going to skim these just because of time, but I'm really happy if people want to either book a separate time to go into more detail on any of the assessment tools. But I wanted to mostly focus today on guiding you a bit in which tool to use when, your assessment choice. Okay. So the idea is that you generally start with one of the global assessment tools, the overview ones, to give you the big picture of how the person's managing all the areas. And then if you need to put the spotlight on a particular area and get a more detailed picture, that's when you would use one of the non-global ones, the ones that focus on a particular area of the person's functioning. Right. So when you're making a decision about which assessment to use, what sort of things do you consider? What influences your decision about what assessment tool to use? Be honest about it. No.
What you're told that you have to do.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah, yeah. So what sort of things are you told you have to do?
You have to complete a minimum house
Okay. Okay, and that's part of the. So you look in the. Is that you in the hub? Is that? Yeah, yeah. Okay. So the Kingston Richmond hub have a quite a prescriptive approach to assessment. So that's kind of manualised. So there's limited scope for clinical reasoning. Well, not clinical reasoning. Your own judgment of that, because they've researched that and found that those tools are generally helpful. So yeah, sometimes there will be a manualised approach that guides you in terms of what assessments to use. Yeah. What else? What other things might influence your decision about what tool to use? The abilities of the client, really important. Say a bit more about that. What sort of things might?
Has the client got the ability to engage in an interview?
Yes.
About your information?
Yeah.
They've got the cognitive ability to understand the questions.
Yeah. Yeah.
Get from them?
Yeah.
Or are you going to need to go to a carer?
Yeah. 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 Perfect. That's really important. The ability of the client is a key determinant about what type of data gathering method you're going to use, and therefore which of the tools is going to lend itself better. The other couple of things really are how much depth do you need to go into? I suppose what's driving the assessment? Is someone asked for it, or is it more just a screening thing that you need to carry out to help you identify whether this is a priority person or not? So the depth that you need to go into might influence your decision. And then secondly, let's be real about it, the amount of time that you have at your disposal. Some of the assessments take longer than others, so that will be a consideration. So we're just going to have a quick overview of the four global ones. So let's talk about the interviews first. So the two interviews are the OCARES, the Occupational Case Analysis Interview and Rating Scale, and the OP, the Occupational Performance History Interview. So the data gathering method is questions, interview questions. So without looking at the prompt sheet, what are the benefits of interviews? What are the good things about interviews as a data gathering method?
Building rapport.
Yes, very helpful for building rapport. My questions are generally pretty well worded. They're quite conversational. They're not questions the person's been asked millions of times before by doctors, and they're good for building a relationship with people a lot of the time. So yeah, rapport building.
Maybe you get a bit more richness from
yes.
A bit more personality.
Yes, yes. You get to really understand the person. You can kind of, and that's a kind of, on the back of that, they allow you to probe. Because these are semi-structured interviews, they're not really prescribed questions. They give you guide questions, but they're called semi-structured because they allow you to probe. They allow you to be curious, to dig a bit deeper if you think there's something significant. So they're good at really getting to know the person. Yeah. Probably one other main one.
Kind of like encouraging agency and
yes.
client.
Yes. Yeah, very much. I want to hear directly from you. I don't want to make assumptions about you. I want you to tell me directly how things are for you. So very empowering from that point of view. So they're the good things about interviews. What are the limitations, or the things where you think probably not an interview is going to be the way to go?
They can be quite lengthy.
Yeah, time might be a consideration. Yeah.
Well, people can't speak for themselves.
Yes,
so.
Definitely. Learning disabilities or other client groups where people are just going to struggle verbally to manage that. It's also quite, it's quite. I think you kind of alluded to earlier, Jane. It's quite psychologically challenging to be, bombarded with lots of questions. It's quite difficult actually, quite challenging to be asked lots and lots of questions. Probably one other main one.
Whether or not they're able to accurately sample.
Yes, that's the key one. Yeah, if the person's personal causation, so medics would talk about lack of insight, we would talk about poor personal causation. Their awareness of their abilities is not so great. Then still can be helpful to ask them, because you want to understand that if there is a mismatch between their version of events and what seems to be a more realistic version of events, then it's helpful to understand that, but you wouldn't want to base your assessment report solely on the interview because you're not confident you're getting an accurate picture. Okay. So the OKERS is really nice tool. If you're not that confident with Moho, OKERS is a really nice tool to just to kind of cut your teeth on, because it will really help you see apply the model to real people. The questions, you've got a nice set of questions, 3 or 4 questions for each of the subdivisions of the model. So you have a few questions about personal causation, a few questions about values. So you very quickly begin to see, so that's what personal causation means, just by the answers you get from the questions. So it's a really good way of learning. That's how I learned the model, by using the OKERS a lot. You really helps you get the concepts and clearly in your mind. So it's a really nice tool. If you haven't used it, it's a very helpful one. And even if I might be repeating, I might be saying this later, but while it's fresh in my mind, even if you just use the OKERS questions to guide your part of your interviewing process, but then you kind of conclude, you know what, probably the MoHost is going to be the more helpful way of pulling everything together. You can still use the information you've gathered from the OKERS to make your ratings in the MoHost. So I can't see any reason why you would ever do an OKERS and a MoHost, because they're both assessing the same thing. So what a lot of people do, I mean, most people's go-to is the MoHost, for lots of reasons that we'll talk about in a minute. But if you want to just gather rich information, all those positive aspects of interviews that we spoke about before, and use that as part of your MoHost ratings, where you've pulled together lots of other sources of information, then that's a really good thing to do as well, I think. So the OP, well, strictly speaking, the OP2 is the latest version of it. I'm guessing most of you won't have used. How many of you have used the OP2? It's not very widely used. Any of you used it? No. Yeah, sort of maybe dabble with it. It's worth knowing about this one. This is more of a historical interview. It's more of a life history interview, getting a person to tell you their story from an occupational perspective and comparing how they functioned in the past with how they're functioning now. That's the main thrust of the interview. And it's based on narrative theory. It's based on the idea that the person that you've got in front of you hasn't just been beamed down. They haven't just been beamed down. So there's a whole story that's brought them to where they are now. So this is a kind of it sort of pays a nod to that whole that concept, that if you really want to understand the person in front of you, you need to see them in context. You need to understand the journey they've been on to get them to where they are today. Downside to this one is it's by far the lengthiest of the tools to use. So it's quite, depending on how verbal the person is, how much they speak, you're talking at least an hour, probably an hour and a half. You can chunk it, you can do it in more than one session. So when might this be helpful, though? I've given you a couple of answers there.
I think, as you said, when someone's presenting quite differently now to how they were.
Yes. Yeah. Try and unpick that. Try and understand what's happened to bring about that change. Yeah. So I think particularly those more complex cases, those revolving door patients maybe on the ward, people that are constantly coming in and out, having a fresh look at them and just think, why does this keep happening? Let's take a step back. Let's try and think a bit more long term about what's going on here. So those more kind of complex cases with people with complex histories, it's worth thinking about. Even in a time pressured environment, that might be time well spent to try and really unpick the journey a bit more thoughtfully. The other time it might be helpful is people with significant volitional challenges, because I'm really picking up the point that you just made, that if the person has really lost a lot of their volition, They're lost, the current situation, they're really lacking drive. You want to try and understand, when was the last time this person was motivated? When was the last time they did feel strongly about something? When was the last time they were doing something that was important to them? And trying to trace that back. Now, someone that's really significantly demotivated, and they recommend this with the remotivation process that some of you might have heard of, they recommend using the OP as an interview with a carer, someone that's known the person for a long time, to get them to tell you the story, so that you can get a picture from someone to try and understand, what's this journey been about? What were the significant events that led to this loss of motivation? Okay. So they're the interviews. Self-report is the next data gathering method. So that's obviously the OSA, the occupational self-assessment. So again, advantages and disadvantages of self-assessment. What are the advantages of self-assessment, using a self-assessment format?
Get more engagement with the client.
Yes.
When they're interpreting it again, then that's self-writing and comparing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so similar to interviews, you want ownership of the person, and this very much puts the client in charge, saying that, I want you to tell me what your life is like, what you're struggling with. Yeah. And it does, as it's got written here, it does acknowledge that the person's, people are experts in their own lives. they've lived the whole life in that body, so they know a lot about themselves. So there's a lot to be gained by asking for the person's self-report. Limitations, as Joe was saying earlier, self-report. If someone's not got very accurate self-report, or doesn't seem to be viewing themselves very accurately, probably not going to be limited use. Again, we'll shed some light on that, and we'll help you understand the mismatch, but you're not going to want to base too much in terms of your intervention on their self-report, probably. Again, though, quite a helpful report for people, tool to consider for people who are hard to engage, people that are really, you're struggling to get on the same page as you. This is just a tool that's saying, look, clearly I'm missing something here. Clearly, I'm not offering you things that are helpful, because you don't seem to be following through in some of the recommendations I've made. Let's take a step back. You tell me what's important to you and what you're struggling with, and then let's make that the starting point for our work together. So engagement problems, this one and the OP are ones that are worth considering. Something that's quite an interesting challenge with the OSA is how do you manage it if there's a discrepancy between what the client is saying and what you seem to have observed. So they've rated themselves. So I think one of the items is about concentrating on tasks. And they have to rate themselves two things. They have to rate themselves, how well do I do that? How well do I concentrate on tasks? 4-point scale. And then secondly, how important is being able to concentrate to me? So 2 ratings they make for themselves. So they've said concentration, no problem at all. You've observed them and you've seen them in a group and they seemed really distracted. What would you do? How would you manage that?
Well, I've done, sorry, I think even talking.
No, go on.
When I was a student, I'd done this with someone who was on the ward and she marked herself like not a problem. I was like, well, if we think about where you're at right now, is that still the case? And she went back and changed her answers.
Oh, okay, yeah, that's helpful. Like that, yeah. Good.
You have a conversation with them.
Yes.
Their values they might rate something they might think it's not a problem because maybe they're valid, they don't really care.
Yes.
There's no point working on something with them they don't really care about.
Yeah. So I quite like that. Just a general open question. Do you mind just telling me a bit about why you put that as a strength? No judgment in the question. Do you mind what did you base that on? Do you mind just so that's quite a nice approach. I like that. Yeah.
Well, they might not understand what it's about.
Yes.
You're asking them
Yes. Which hopefully that would come out from that sort of question, wouldn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the questions, they are not easy. The terminology.
Yes.
The glossary is not easy to follow.
Yes. There is in the OSA a glossary at the back that helps reframe things in slightly more everyday language if you think someone's struggling with the way things are worded. A couple of things to think about. One is before you say anything, probably, and I think open question's fine, but almost before you say anything, I would just say, would it be okay if I share some thoughts with you on what you've put down here? So it's almost like asking permission to give some feedback, because you've sold this to the person as this is a selfish. I want you to tell me what you think. So before saying anything of our perspective, it's just like, would it be okay? Would you be interested to hear some of my reflections or observations on what you've recorded? And if they don't seem too freaked out by that, you might be able to just gently say, just noticed there that you've put no problem in concentration. I just noticed the other day in the art group, I don't know if you remember, I just seemed a few times that you seemed to be, your mind seemed to have wandered, and you didn't seem to be fully focused on the task. And so you just put that out there, and if the person says no, I wasn't, I was fine, then you stick with their rating. It is a self-report, so that's fine. But maybe some people might be prepared, as you said, just to kind of amend their ratings based on some feedback. But at the end of the day, it's a self-report, and you go with their perception. In terms of the final care plan, there might need to be a bit of negotiation, because if there's something really important they haven't identified, there might need to be a kind of compromise around, yes, I will support you with the area that you've identified as most important, but there will need to be this reflected in the care plan because others have raised concerns, and we've observed some concerns in this area. All delicate stuff, but sometimes there'll need to be a bit of give and take around the final care plan.
So if somebody can't self-report, you wouldn't use those.
No.
Reports, so you wouldn't have the carer kind of reporting and use it in that way.
No, I don't think you would use this. I suppose use your judgment. It's not intended for that. If you think clinically that would still be a useful thing to do, to have a checklist for a carer to fill in, I don't think there's anything to say you must never do that. It's not intended for that, but yeah. So, right, how are we doing for time? I'm going to stop in a minute. Right, MoHost. Let's make sure we cover MoHost. I'm assuming, have you all dabbled with the MoHost? All had to go at the MoHost at different times? Yeah. So we're not going to spend too much time on this. I think the reason the MoHost is by far the most commonly used tool is just the flexibility. It just allows you to use any information at your disposal to make the ratings, and it allows you to triangulate. This funny word, triangulate. So the 3 points of the triangle. Surprise, surprise. One is allows you to get self-report evidence to make your rating. So that's part of one point of the triangle is what the person says, and that might be through something like the OSA, might be through an interview. Self-report is one. Number two is third-party report. So what does a family member say, or what do the Rio notes say? What do the MDT say is going on for this person? And then the third part of the triangle is functional observation, actually seeing the person do things. So the MoHost is the only of the MoHo tools that allows you the freedom to use all 3 points of the triangle. So it's fairly obvious why it's the most popular tool. It's also a bit more precise than the OKERS. So the OKERS, one of the criticisms of the OKERS might be that for the whole area of skills, it only has one question. So one rating to summarise physical, cognitive, and people skills. The MoHost has obviously got 12. It's a lot more precise way of reporting on the person's overall function. There's a new version of the MoHost called the MoHost Explore that our learning disabilities colleagues are using, and that's for patients that would typically bottom out on a normal MoHost. So people that are more impaired, so either people with more significant learning disabilities, or maybe people with dementia in advanced stages who would pretty much score R in everything. So the MoHost Explore is designed, it's got a much more lower baseline, and so allows you to be more precise about patients that are more lower functioning. So that's something that those guys are finding helpful in learning disabilities. Right, I think we will pause there. Any questions about any of those global tools?
Maybe have a look at them. Lenovo Explore. I haven't seen it.
Yes. Well, you guys are going to send me a copy, aren't you?
Yes.
Yeah.
We are.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we've only from the Learning Disability Service. So we've only just started kind of using it with some of our people. But yeah, I can probably send an example of a report that actually one of our students kind of has done. Yeah. So
I don't. Do you have to have done the? Is it a training? Is it a mandatory training thing for that? Do you have to be trained in it, or is it? Or it's the manual?
I don't know an awful lot about it, to be honest.
No. Okay.
No. I
think it's a manual thing, isn't it? I think as long as you've got the manual,
Yeah. Sure.
Okay. No, that'd be helpful. If we get a sense about what the items are, that might help guide us in terms of whether we need to be getting.
I can put something together and send it round if people are interested.
Okay.
I mean, I don't know how many other services would use it.
Yeah, I suspect probably not, but it'd be helpful for people just to gauge that for themselves. Yeah. All right, let's have a break. So feel free to go down to the ground floor if you'd like to get a hot drink or just chill. If we meet back about 11. Okay, thanks. Show me this email because I was pretty sure. Yeah, but there's been more since then.
David, you're on television as well.
Oh.